Hey, what's up, everyone? You're currently tuned into TBD on KCSB FM 91.9 in Santa Barbara and netnetradio.com, Tijuana. Today, Lietoc and I are joined by Los Angeles-based community organizer, DIY theorist, and bedroom planner Noah Klein. So, Noah, what are your beginnings as a musician, and what were some of your formative music moments and your intro to the DIY community, and how important were DIY spaces in shaping your experience?
I love that. I'll try not to ramble. I mean, I think my first like collectivist approach to music communities in LA was probably middle school. My friends had this band called the Cape Crusaders, who I thought were like the coolest people in the world. We went to Palms Middle School,
That's sick.
and so then some of my other friends and I started a band, and I decided that I'd play drums, but couldn't afford or have space for a drum set.
Yeah.
So I collected different size safety cones from around the school campus and some sticks. Eventually upgraded to drumsticks, but kept the safety cones for a while,
Yeah.
as they all had different tunings.
Uh-huh.
And we played shows together, and that was amazing. We played like the Westwood Rec Center Battle of the Bands and stuff like that. And then in high school, more friends started musical projects and outlets, and
Yeah.
we just continued playing music with one another. We went to a lot of businesses around Los Angeles and asked if after hours we could kind of commandeer their space, kick them back some of the door funds from that evening, and
Yeah.
just like have a show for like the youth in the neighborhood. And for the most part, people were really receptive. The most successful venture that we had with that was called the Cutting Room. And it was a hair salon that was literally one block over from the promenade.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm like exaggerating in my head, but I feel like 1,000 to 1,500 kids came through every other weekend we had a
Wow.
show. It might have been like 500, but still, that is a lot. Um, and so that was really cool because it brought together the public and the private school systems.
Yeah.
And so like a lot of the bands that I remember playing with were like No Sex Just Dancing, which was like Edward Norton's and Gene Simmons kids.
Hmm.
And the first ambient set that I ever remember seeing in my life was Pico, which was Billy Idol's son.
Oh, wow.
And one of my favorite bands to date, which I wish that I had any of their music, was the Intimates. And that was like Grace Dennis. And they were just like a really cool folk project. And I don't know, I met a lot of like incredible people who expanded my mind and horizons. I think a project that a lot of people still really love is Dad, which was Zach Robinson, who released his dad album on House to Mountain, like I don't know,
Oh,
8 years ago or something.
wow.
And Zach, when we were in high school, his parents had like a little shack in the back of their yard and called it the Zach Shack, and that's where like Anamanaguchi played their first West Coast show.
Wow,
And
that's insane.
Luke, who is now in Anamanaguchi, and Mario and Will, who does Baths, and so many Dijon, who does Dij, like so many just folks who like are just orbiting and still
Yeah,
doing their thing on a wonderful level. Like we all just play these like bakeries and haircutting salons
that's
and
so sick.
so I don't know. I don't think we realized that any of this had any kind of like precedent or like historical context anywhere else. It
Yeah.
wasn't until I left LA and lived in New York when I
Hmm.
moved when I was like 18 and heard the phrase DIY when I went to Death by Audio.
Oh,
'Cause I moved
nice.
there right after it opened, and that was
Hmm.
the first time I'd ever heard that phrase and was like, oh yeah, that makes a sense, I guess.
What year had Death by Audio opened?
2007.
Okay,
Oh, wow.
yeah, because
Okay.
that was right. Then they had that through 2014.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and it was just kind of funny too because I didn't realize that I'd moved there right when it opened. I thought it was there for like forever
Yeah.
basically. And so it took years for me to be like, oh wow, I really moved like right at this like interesting moment.
Yeah. That's sick,
Um,
Noah. Wow,
but
dude,
yeah, I
that's
would say
wild.
that's my formative childhood aha moment.
So,
Just getting together with friends and finding out like what makes your heart soar and what makes you feel like you could self-organize and self-determine your collective futures as kids.
that is absolutely like so sick. Whenever we ask like people what their like DIY background is, they never bring us back to like the very back. We're usually fishing. So it's like sick that you like brought like I don't know, that's so cool. Just like playing the traffic cones and then just going from there. Like that is so amazing. Um so remind me again, you guys were just playing shows at like hair salons and stuff, or was this like what's it called, like a collective or something you're saying, or
Yeah, I mean, like, we were just doing it really loose with one another, with and
Yeah.
for one another for a long
Hmm.
time. We mostly did things that, like, at the time we were calling DIY. Several years later, we started calling it DIT, doing it together.
Oh, that's
Because like
sick.
there was nothing that was solo about any of this. It was all rooted in interdependence.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think just for the fun of it, also because local institutions started recognizing how many kids love to support other
Hmm.
kids, which is a beautiful thing. Like
Yeah.
places like the Roxy, the Whiskey, the Larchmont, they were all like, "Hey, you should all come play here. We'll make it all ages for the night." And so we did that for fun, which I'm glad we did because as an adult, I have zero desire to enter those kinds of zones.
Yeah. I feel
So
that.
it's kind of fun to be like, "Yeah, when we were 16, we played where like Jimi Hendrix smashed his
Yeah.
first guitar or something." I
Oh,
don't
there you go.
know.
So were you were LA based, right? Or where were you
Yeah.
based when else was going in? Okay, yeah, LA based. So were there even any DIY spaces back then? Like I know that
Oh yeah,
there's
the
like
smell was here. We went
okay.
to the smell a lot in high school, and I'm so thankful for that. I know that there were other zones, but I kind of get confused between what was here when I was like 15, 16, what was here when I was
Yeah,
20.
was
I feel like Pearspace probably
okay.
wasn't there until a little bit later.
Okay.
But yeah, I feel like I should like sit down and almost look at like what spaces did exist that I had no idea
Yeah.
were around. It was also really nice to grow up with KXLU and Dub Lab. I've
Oh
known about
yeah.
those since I was like,
Mm.
I'm in KXLU just because it's on the radio like forever.
Hmm.
But Dub Lab I remember finding out about when I was 15 and was just like, oh my God, like what is this?
That is so cool that you like also found this stuff so young. Like I feel like it took like at least me and Maddie a while to find like a DIY community that like we could like, fit into, you know? Yeah, that's sick. So what brought you to New York in 2007, I guess?
Yeah, I just did the thing that your parents kind of tell you to do, which is like we'll be proud of you if you go learn a vocation of some
Oh,
sort.
yeah.
And I really wasn't down with a lot of what college came to represent.
Hmm.
And I found a school on the internet called Eugene Lang and the New School that was very heavily rooted in general Marxism.
Oh,
And I
that's
was like,
sick.
if they take me, that would be really cool.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like I love zones like Santa Barbara and Santa Cruz,
Yeah.
and could easily see myself just like enjoying the beach and everything that
Yeah.
those places have to offer. And so luckily, um, I was turned down from most places.
Yeah.
And yeah, I had a meeting with the counselor at Eugene Lang and told him about what my friends and I did with music and public poetry performance and all of
Yeah.
this like kind of renegade art. And he was just like, your GPA can't get you in here, but like these stories are gold.
Yeah.
And so he was like, cool, this is, and I don't know. So I got a really nice scholarship and otherwise would have never been able to pull that off. And yeah, just kind of moved to New York without ever having been there or knowing anything about it.
That's amazing. So how long did you stay in New York for?
Of like pretty close to 10 years.
Oh, nice.
I like took like tiny little bits to I had one of my closest friends moved to Providence, and so I stayed with him for a bit.
Hmm.
One of my professors led a program in Berlin, and he told me that my scholarship covered that, and so I went to Berlin for a tiny bit
Oh, nice.
to go study the history of music there.
Oh, that's cool.
And yeah, I lived in Boston for a little bit with Liz Pelly and
Oh,
Ellie Carter
nice.
from
Wow.
Control Top and Emily Rio, and we had a space called
Ah,
Dream House. That was like one of the most beautiful house show spaces to date that I've had in my life.
That is so sick, dude. No, I don't know how you do it. Like that's just so cool, dude. How do you like build these connections? Like that's crazy. Maddie, I feel like this is a good like I guess move into like the next topic. Do you want to like read
yeah.
your part?
I guess I'll try to go about because I didn't know about death by audio in terms that itself is like another fascinating thing. And then post death by audio in 285 Kent, probably the New York space that really gets referenced is Silent Barn. And Thomas and I both, find out about Silent Barn like 2019 or 2020 ages after because
Which
we
is
never
like
traveled. And
amazing because that's what it should be for. It's a resource.
Yeah.
And the thing, of course, though, being like we would figure out about it through kind of whatever digital film is left, whether that be the text, photos, kind of just remnants. And so for us, then, I guess really it's like we kind of just want to ask, I think, general stuff about Silent Barn a bit there. But like, what was the day-to-day routine of this kind of crazy, if I'm getting it right, like a 24/7 not show space, but community space.
Also, were you there when
Yeah.
Silent Barn started? Like, were you part of that, or?
I mean, not when the first one started. That was like 2004-ish.
Okay.
But I've heard stories. I've met a few people who had nothing to do with Silent Barn throughout the rest of its history, but like who were there for like day one, and that's always really cool to hear.
Yeah.
But I attended and played the original Silent Barn a lot, and then I don't know if you had read anything about that initial shutdown. It was broken into, robbed, raided. The
Really? Wow.
murals were all vandalized, and then when it was reported to the police as a theft, they were like, "Well, you're running an illegal space. Now you're shut down."
ACAB, dude. ACAB.
So yeah, so for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years, the crew that was living there and really running the space on a day-to-day basis were looking for someplace new where ideas can be expanded upon and where things can be attempted to do above board and legally to see what that would look like for an interdependent art space. And as far as I know, that's not really something that like has ever been done to the extent that Silent Barn has done it. And so it was really cool to be along for that ride. I sat in on a lot of those meetings, and it was beautiful to just like be in conversation with folks like Joe Kunal and Lucas Crane, and then when they opened the new space in Bushwick, I literally left New York to move to Boston and move in with Liz the day before. Nice. But a bunch of friends moved in and were a part of the first iteration of the Bushwick space. And then after about a year and a half, I came back to Brooklyn and moved in and was there for on and off for about like 3 years, but for the better part of 3 years. And I'd say the day to day, it was a lot of meetings. When you're running something collectively that doesn't employ hierarchy, you really kind of like need to work on decentralization and communication and relationships. And so we worked off of a series of working groups that were kind of always in and out of meetings. And then my friends and I also ran a free school for the neighborhood. It was a small group of our idea to keep Silent Barn open during the afternoon throughout the day leading into the shows so that kids had a place to go after school to do their homework.
That's amazing.
A group called Educated Little Monsters did after school workshops. We opened up the cafe just so that neighbors felt comfortable coming in to sit down, have coffee, talk to us, figure out like, when I say like us and neighbors, obviously like there's like some folks who were born and raised in New York, but until that, I would say no one who was born and raised in Bushwick would have considered themselves an integral member of the Silent Barn collective. And I really feel like it came out of cafe hours that folks who were born and raised in the neighborhood really felt a sense of ownership over the space, which became the most important thing to me. I kind of stopped booking all music things at Silent Barn and became really just full on about what would Silent Barn look like if it was actually a tapestry of the neighborhood and the community, and not something where like folks who've moved here want to experience, or folks who are traveling into Bushwick or moving to Bushwick for this want to experience. What does it look like to build this with and for the immediate community?
Wow, that's insane. I feel like that also takes like a lot of like personal growth too, to be like, I'm gonna stop doing what I want to do and just start doing what everybody else that's been here wants to do. You know, like that's so cool.
Like at the end of the day, why are you doing something if it's not for the people who are there?
Exactly. That's true.
And that just, that radically shifted my line of thought. And was just a really beautiful form of collaboration. Obviously, there's so many people who want to book shows, so and then I lived in 603 upstairs with like Jordan Lee, Johanna, Liz Pelly, and any number of folks throughout time, and so we booked shows up there. Probably
was that room itself? Was it just kind of like who's who this month, kind of coming through? You mentioned Jordan and Liz there. Mutual benefit, one of the best writers, I think.
Jordan was living there for probably like a year and a half before I came back to New York, and we were living together in there for about like another maybe 6 months to a year before Jordan got an apartment down the street, and then Liz and I continued living there. We had bunk beds.
Nice. That's sick.
I think Liz and I shared a bunk bed for about a year and a half, which was should like deserve its own Netflix series or something.
That's so funny, dude.
Like the mutual benefit song "Fire Escape" like was written pretty much on that fire escape at Silent Barn. And an album and a half for sure were recorded in Julian and Carlos's Gravesend studio, which was off to the side of the barn. They were running a studio. We had a live theater, two performance stages, including the one that was in our kitchenette, 12-ish artist studio lockouts, a barbershop / record shop called Deep Cuts, zine library called The Canned Ham, beautiful. It just like, it keeps going on and on. I've truly never seen anything as unhinged as what everyone managed to pull off with one another.
That is so crazy.
And I don't know if we'll ever see anything like that again, because it took a horrible amount of energy.
It almost reminds me, Maddie, of like Biko, like before Josh left. Like, I feel like that's almost like what Josh and all those people were trying to do with Biko and the co-ops. But it just,
when I was a teenager too, seeing what Josh was doing with Biko was one of the most inspiring things to me. And I feel blessed that Josh is a bud. Because a lot of the bands that he was booking, the live sets that would make their way onto like pre-Wi-Fi internet, like a lot of that is also like, that was really the first iteration of me seeing people do this outside of Los Angeles. Like Beaker Garage might have been the first place outside of LA that I'd heard of that had shows like the ones that my friends and I were doing. And then like Trunk Space in Phoenix. But it was like, piecemeal, like word of mouth, because we're like, iPhones and Wi-Fi started 2007, the year that I started college. So it's like when you're in high school, it's really just like hearing from a friend who drove up to Santa Barbara, like, oh, I saw this thing. And it's like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Dude, that is so crazy to hear. I really want to dive into like hearing what you know about like Biko and stuff. Cause like, we obviously went there in a different era, but beforehand, I also want to talk to like, you said that you guys are running like Silent Barn without like, without a hierarchy or whatever. So like, were you guys like an anarchist space? Like, do you guys like consider yourselves that, or?
I wouldn't say that anyone would consider ourselves that, just because that implies so much more that we weren't doing. Like, but I would say that like a lot of our core values were very much aligned with anarchist community building, mutual aid. There was also a great spot down the street called The Base that was an anarchist community space, and a pizza shop down the street called Norbert's, which was a co-op run by anarchists.
That's
who also
so sick, dude.
Spent a lot of time at the barn. So there's a lot of mutual thought and reverence. But at the end of the day, like, we're selling alcohol, like we're paying taxes. Like there's just too many things that just don't completely align with going full in. But yeah, I mean, definitely running the free school is like a giant nod towards like anarchist free school community models.
That is so cool. So how'd you guys like pull that off, like without like a hierarchy and stuff? Like, that's so crazy. Like, how'd you guys, I feel like that's so hard to accomplish something that big. Like, I feel like we're trying to do that too, like at the co-ops, like when we lived there. Like, obviously there's still like board members that were important and all that stuff, but like,
and same here, but the board members I think were really great at kind of decentering themselves and just like really listening to what everyone's needs were. Since the board members were no longer living there, they were just like really integral to helping reach their tentacles out into the wider New York community if we did need something that we didn't have the resources for. But other than that, I really would say that it was a series of working groups. We had to do everything in the building aside from replacing the roof. That was the one thing that the landlord said that he would be responsible for. So like, whether it came to fixing the structure of the building, the boilers, etc. That was like a deep space working group, the show booking working group, community building working group, the residency working group. So it's like we had like probably like 40 to 60 working groups that met weekly, and then we would all meet once, maybe twice a week, and we called it the kitchen. And like there was like literal zines made for the language that we had adopted.
That's sick.
To keep all this straight. So I would say that it was really just a series of a lot of working groups that came together once a week, and those meetings were like minimum 4 hours. So it's like I feel like that's the funny thing. It's like when you talk to, I mean, any mutual aid organizing like happening anytime, it's like I feel like a lot of it gets romanticized, but at the end of the day, you're just in a lot of meetings. Yeah,
I could see that. Still though, I feel like that sounds like something that I would really want to be involved in, that there's just nothing like that around here, like
I wish for folks like myself who were living there, it's like we paid rent to the space. We like, I also at times would have 2 or 3 jobs that weren't in the space, but then there were times where I could just do sound, bartend, host, and was able to pay my rent off of that. So it's like I never had more than like $10 in my bank account after that, but it's like all of my immediate needs were taken care of. And like when you're in your 20s, like that's all you need.
Dude, that's so
to a
sick.
certain extent.
That's so sick, dude. That's so cool. Um, I guess anyways, moving back a little bit, I do want to talk about like Biko and stuff. So like what were your experiences like with Biko? Because like I've never like actually sat down with Josh and had like a really long conversation because I feel like Josh doesn't really like to think back
Talk
to
about it.
yeah, talk about or like think back to that much because like some weird stuff happened later on and then like I feel like that scene kind of like fell apart. But like yeah, anyways, like what was your experience with Biko? Like I think that's so cool. Like the scene was like kind of dead and like when I got there was a few people trying to hold on to like what Biko was doing. And when I first got to Santa Barbara, like Fun Zone was on its way out. I don't know if you remember Fun Zone. That was another space that was really active in Santa Barbara, but that died too, like when Spencer left, and then it was just like Santa Barbara DIY is gone. And then like at KCSB too, like what Josh had brought in terms of like a DIY community to KCSB, which KCSB has like always had, but like never like I feel like there's just a specific era of like Josh influenced KCSB and DIY that you just find like little artifacts of like here and there, like oh here's a zine or like here's an old flyer, like happenings at Biko, like do it together, you know, like
you go on Bandcamp and you see it was like for free cake for every creature when she shouts out a bunch of art. She's like, and there's Josh Redman over here and he has a show on KCSB in Santa Barbara.
And if you even just like okay. And you look at like Josh's website and stuff and he's like, you know, been doing this for so long and there's just so like this massive archive of like all these bands that have played on his show, like all these bootlegs from when he hosted stuff at Biko. Like it's like wow, this is a crazy like era that like we've never seen, and like to me was like a huge inspiration to what I'm doing, and like obviously was like trying to kind of carry on like bring people from outside of like Ventura, Santa Barbara area, you know, and bring them to play there. But it's like we couldn't really do it, and then especially like with COVID it just died, and it's like I feel like it was just really hard too, and like we were trying to get people to come to shows, and it was like so we bring these bands like that were on tour or from like LA or something, we'd have 5 people show up, and it was just like I'm so sorry, like I know you have this like idea of what Santa Barbara is, but like it's just not that anymore, you know, like so anyways, yeah, like what was it like back then?
I mean, I never got to go. I just heard stories about it.
Oh, you never actually went. Okay.
Yeah, so like so Josh's Biko it's always been a mythical thing to me. I've just seen like photos and heard like some live sets that are probably like on my like multiple laptops ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, like to me it just it always represented like people self-organizing in a way that felt really familiar, that I didn't know how, like I had no other models for it. And so to see it happening on a college campus was really cool, and to see it happening with like maybe like I couldn't tell if there was any funding that came from the school or if it was all just self-directed, and like I mean also just seeing like
we're not even quite able to untangle that ourselves.
Yeah, well KCSB had money, but like Josh was doing stuff outside of the realm of KCSB, which is crazy.
And there was so much of it. Like and I like the work that Josh was doing also really reminds me of what someone in New York at the time and still was doing, Jordan Michael. I feel like it really takes a deep I say masochism. I don't know if they would agree with that phrase, but I do think that it's like a deep sense of masochism that's very much rooted in like collectivist world building and wanting to see a resource flourish that can be something meaningful to a lot of people. And also like maybe it's just not masochism when it's something that you want to see in the world and you're not seeing someone else do it. It feels like it's a moral imperative to both like try and build this thing and to make sure that there's going to be people who are inspired by it that can both continue its legacy or maybe want to continue it as a project to pass off to the next generation of folks. So I think like projects like that are incredible. And I think that even though Biko Garage shifts, transforms, ceases to be like just like still the stories that people have about it, even like the feelings that I have for something that I never got to see.
Seriously,
like
so
I think
cool.
that's so beautiful. And that's probably exactly what Josh like wanted.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's so interesting. And just like even in like the co-op library, there's like a zine like library that like, you know, Josh had put together and stuff, and like that's still there. It's just so crazy. It's just so wild that the legacy is like there, you know. And I feel like nobody else like
I don't know if any of this is scanned, but even like as you're finding show posters and whatnot, like I feel like people really need to make sure that all of this is digitized. That's like one of my worry. No, I mean, not worries. One of my concerns with a lot of what we did at like 603 above Silent Barn, I feel like it kind of got absorbed into Silent Barn, but like we lined the entire hallway entering the residence with the hand-drawn show posters that we would do in
amazing.
the apartment.
Yeah.
And I know that Liz has a lot, but I just want to make sure we actually archive those so they don't disintegrate one day.
If I make my way back to KCSB, which I hope I can soon, like when they open the station back up and stuff, I just need to like tell them and be like, yo guys, I'm gonna just like go into the music director office and just start like finding flyers that I remember seeing in here and just start scanning them, because a lot of those flyers too, like they would have like schedules for the community space, like this is what's going down, like we're gonna have like yoga, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. And that was like something too that like after seeing those flyers and stuff, I was like, wow dude, a community space could be so much more than just like what's it called, just music and stuff, you know? And like I wanted
to spend so much time building these we spend so much time like building these systems, but then don't record them and pass it down, and like exactly like that, like that's like even just finding something so simple in a sense, but getting so many ideas from it.
Exactly.
It's just so important to keep giving.
Yeah. And another thing too that I was really trying to do with KCSB, sorry, I'm just like going off about this stuff, but like, you know, I just got so much inspiration like back in the day, like when I was at KCSB, like I feel like KCSB changed my life. But anyways, like there was like, I would see all these DIY artists like that were in the KCSB library, that some I would have no idea who they are, and then some where it's like, wow, this is like a self-made CD, but this person's on like polyvinyl now or something like that, and they were just like playing here like super DIY, like just touring by them, like just doing this for fun, you know, before they got signed or anything. And so I was trying to do that too with like the music direct when I was music director, just try and get like people's tapes from like shows and like all this stuff and be like, I need to put this in an archive, like I need to save this somehow, like this needs to be like saved. And I'm just like worried, and like I really hope that like the music directors carry that on, like from the DIY aspect of it, because like I feel like you can get so lost in like the big indie side of like what college radio is, like the capitalist side of college radio, where it's like you have these people promoting big indie to you, and it's like they're just shoving this down your throat almost, you know. And like some of it's cool for sure, but it's like, you know what I'm saying?
It's rooted in commerce. It's not rooted in relationships. It's not rooted in like what's happening on the ground in our communities. And my friends and I for like a decade have been calling that the indie industrial complex or the pitchfork industrial complex. Like, I mean, they want to make it so that it's easy to get lost in, so that you kind of stop paying attention to, I guess, like what would be like the local news, like what's literally happening in your neighborhood. And so to me too, I feel like that's like something that I'm having a lot of fun with like this like floating series. It's like a form of like both storytelling and like kind of like re-territorializing like how a lot of people feel about art. I feel like so much of the time folks like will associate like great music with the space. It's like oh well, like you haven't played at Zebulon, or you haven't played
that's true.
I don't know, the El Rey, so like maybe you don't take music seriously. And that's such a ridiculous thing that so many people associate art with commerce that closely. And it's just like, why should art have anything to do with real estate to begin with?
That's
and
definitely
so just kind
true.
of bringing like both like our neighbors, beloved local musicians, occasionally people who are flying in for these, and just being like, yo, play in a park. It both brings people into a new space that maybe they didn't take the time to really sit with before, and build a new relationship with, as well as completely build a new relationship with what it means to deeply listen, to support local arts communities, and to just like understand that you can be a part of a process that has nothing to do with alcohol consumption or real estate speculation. Yeah,
that's sick. I guess that brings us into like our conversation that we want to talk about, like with Floating Maddie. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah. So again, I mean, at this point, knowing, now really even getting more full with the background and the relationship that you have with DIY spaces, how did you kind of originally capitulate or come up with the idea here for Floating in Los Angeles?
I mean, I had nothing to do with that. I have been doing outdoor shows in LA. I mean, like we just said, since I was like a teenager. And then even from like 2008 to 2014-ish, my friends and I were running a collective called Family. And I would say like the hub of that was in Los Angeles. And so we had some wild outdoor shows that I don't think anyone will ever be able to pull off to that scale again, now that we have iPhones and hyper surveillance. And even during the pandemic, I booked like several outdoor shows in really safe ways. And so Brian, who started Ambient Church, and his friend Brian wanted to start an outdoor series. And they just hit me up immediately. And I was like, sick, I love doing this. Thanks for the excuse to do more of this. Because I kind of just do it at my own pace. But they're like, yeah, like we want to go full in on this. And so I've kind of just had, to some degree, like free reign with booking and hiring. And so it's like when you came to the show, it's like everyone working as a local musician. And that's really important to me, to make sure that like if we're going to create a local economy, that it actually stays within a local economy, and that everything is like by and for artists as much as possible. And yeah, so
that's awesome.
I would say that it was mostly just like I've been doing these things for a long time, and it was nice for folks to just be like, yo, do you want to do it like this? And I was like, yeah, I was just gonna do that anyways.
Yeah.
Before I guess I go back maybe into talking about floating, I know you had brought up Ambient Church, which also, that's like another kind of fascinating project. Is that more related to some, because what was the booking for that? I know they had done some stuff with Cranky for their 25th, and just kind of curious about, you know, the space between that. Like, what was that space like?
Yeah, Ambient Church was started by Brian, I want to say in like 2016, 2017, and I kind of hopped in 2019. Maybe like 9 months before the pandemic. So I mean, I could talk about how things happened before, like the Crinky 25th anniversary, like was just a natural, like, we're turning 25. These artists would like to go on tour, and we don't want to do it through venues.
Yeah.
And so it gets booked throughout a series of churches.
That's sick.
So when I hopped in, it was largely about building more things like that and building out a network of churches around the country. So we could expand this project to not just be so New York, LA based.
Yeah.
So I started building relationships with churches in LA, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, Minneapolis, Chicago, several in Brooklyn, DC, and so like we really did kind of have Asheville. I could keep going. We really in Austin. We really had like a touring network kind of set up that has now been really destabilized by COVID. And so it's just kind of been like having to take some deep breaths. Like Brian and I several months ago sat down and we were ready to send folks on the road, and then Delta comes back. So at this point, we're kind of just like, I mean, Brian did last night's Basinski show in New York that looks like it went beautifully. But for the most part, I feel like we do kind of need to hit pause for a little bit. Or maybe just like once every couple months in New York until we all feel comfortable seeing what this would look like on a wider scale. A lot of churches just don't want to book larger gatherings, and that's the only way that these are going to work. And I don't even know how comfortable I feel in a large indoor gathering. So it's like, why should we ask other people to do that moving forward? But yeah, so that's kind of where we're at right now. It's just like trying to be patient and make sure that when we go about this with the same degree of love and energy, that we're doing it as responsibly as we can.
So how are you building this network? Sorry, Maddie, but didn't mean to take your, but like, how did you build this network of churches and stuff in like all these different places?
And same thing as with DIY spaces and community art spaces. It's really just reaching out phone call by phone call and having a conversation with the pastors, with the music directors, explaining where we're coming from, the energy and the context of what we do, as well as the I guess like the historical context of the musicians that we would like to collaborate with the space with. And for the most part, like folks are very receptive. I'm culturally Jewish, and so know nothing about different branches of Christianity, but it's been really interesting being like, okay, well, like Presbyterians are actually way more into having these conversations than Catholics are. And so it's been kind of funny, like learning a lot more about Christianity via who is the most open to community art. But yeah, I'd say it's kind of just one and the same, just at a completely different scale, and just kind of a different learning process, as well as I mean, the selection process is definitely limited in that since everything is done with like immersive projection mapping, we do really need to be very aware of which spaces kind of lend themselves to that.
Yeah. What is immersive projection mapping? Sorry.
Oh yeah, like everything's projection mapped so that like when you walk into a church, every archway, every bit of the architecture is
Oh, I
then
see.
technologically mapped so that when a visual artist comes in, they can digitally render the entire church, or at least the most visible aspect of like the facade of it,
Yeah.
and turn it into a piece of like fluid artwork.
Wow, that's crazy. That's sick. Anyways, Maddie, go ahead.
In 2017, I know at the time, going back a little bit to floating or talking about the spaces here. So when you had an interview for Cuddle Formation, that fun release, you were asked if permanence for DIY is misguided. And so floating, especially the way it's been handled with, we're getting text messages on our phone being told, okay, there's going to be it at this spot. The fact that the spots could definitely very much switch. There's new parks or places probably that have yet to come up, but with
Oh
that
yeah.
absence of a typical permanent, if not revolving space, and that emphasis on curating these environments, though, is that you still say kind of a continuation of that answer or a new like path forward for, how to get beyond, DIY's impossible permanence? Let's say.
Yeah, I mean, to talk about permanence is it's so rooted in property and space, and it's like that sounds important right now, but in the future that sounds archaic. And when you look at like conversations surrounding art and real estate, like obviously art washing has been a thing for decades, and it is horrible to see that happening. Aside from when Defend Boyle Heights was up and running, and the work that they were also doing with local artists, it's like real estate always finds a way. When you look at the history of real estate and art spaces, at the end of the day, they are mostly owned by white men. And so it's just like all of these parks have stories to tell. It's not just like the stories of the land and what the land has meant over thousands of years, but also the people who fought for that land recently. And to even just know how this park is there is such a fascinating thing. I remember we were talking really briefly about Tierra de la Culebra and the Highland Park Leaving Records series of concerts. And like that park itself is amazing. It's not something that was built by the city. It was built by the community following the riots in 92.
Oh, wow.
Someone came and had a series of meetings with the community of Highland Park to find out what folks wanted with the resources that were available as a small community. And folks were like, there's nowhere for our kids to go after school on the weekends that we can easily walk to. And so what happens? People take a section of the land that was very much neglected and built their own resource. And that is incredible. That to me is no different than not no different. I would say that sets the precedent for how DIY, DIT interdependence emerges. You have mutual aid building throughout history in marginalized communities, which the art does draw a lot from, whether or not people realize it or not. And so it's like, even when we talk about like how these spaces have relationships with anarchism doesn't have a place in this world if it's not borrowing from methodologies and tactics of marginalized communities. And so I think that all of these conversations are super interrelated. And so I guess, talking about impermanence, I think it's really important for us to especially now. I think that like now that abolition is a household conversation for very good reason, it's also really important to discuss abolition of the land return, decolonization, deterritorialization. And I think a lot of that has to do with kind of separating the idea of capital and city-owned land, and realizing that like this is like, I mean, the land belongs to the people. The parks, the Whole Foods parking lot, the roof of the movie theater, like that doesn't belong to just some like LLC. This belongs to the city inhabitants, and like we should be utilizing it in ways that make us feel like we can self-organize and self-determine what our futures are.
Wow, that's absolutely.
So yeah, even if like throwing like nice ambient shows in the park doesn't feel like it immediately relates, at least in my head, it's like step one towards shifting people's maybe day-to-day thought process towards
Conscious building.
Towards that. Yeah.
Wow, that is like so cool. No, that's sick. I've never thought about it that way, that it's like, we always like put like attach art to like capital and stuff like that. And Yeah, that's so cool. Um, I wish that here in like Ventura too, we could just have shows like that. I don't know, but I feel like we could never pull off like, I guess we have pulled off like hardcore shows and stuff in like outdoor spaces, but I feel like it's just sketchy. You know, you can't do it for too long, you know?
Which is why these shows are only going for like an hour, 2 hours. Like the show, like I need to pack up the car in a few hours to head over to the Exposition Park Rose Garden.
Oh, I
And
see.
for some of the spaces we've gotten permits for
Yeah.
them, but like today it's like they like Exposition Park only rents for weddings. So it's like,
Oh,
okay,
really?
you want to rent it for $5,000? And we're like,
Oh my God.
no.
Yeah.
So it's like we have a 1 hour program because I don't know if it's going to get shut down or not.
Yeah,
But like Exposition
wow.
Park is by and for the people. Why should
Yeah.
some security guard be able to shut us down for just getting together and listening to like music that like no one's necessarily being charged for?
Yeah.
It's like, isn't that what our parks are for?
That's another thing I was gonna ask too, is like how do you like manage to like do this? Because I know that like the state still wants like a piece of like everything, you know what I'm saying, in terms of like even if you're gonna try and host something, it's like you gotta get a noise permit, you gotta do all this stuff, you gotta do all this stuff. It's like, dude, why can't we just have a night where like we can get the kids out and like just have a good time, you know? Like
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're breaking any decibel limits, and
Yeah, that's
we're
true.
intentionally going about that with with who's playing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's also like such like a lovely group of people. Like Janice has been enormously helpful and instrumental in securing a lot of these spaces. And so like with like Bronson Canyon with Sunara a couple weeks back.
Oh,
like,
that's
yeah, that
yeah,
was
like,
so sick,
that
dude.
that made me so. I've been wanting to see a concert in Bronson Canyon since I was a kid. Like
Yeah.
to see that happen, like just like it still fills my heart with so much joy.
That's
But like
so sick.
Janice like really connected with the city over weeks to build a relationship with Griffith Park, who owns Bronson Canyon,
Yeah.
to figure out how to do the permitting, how to make sure that we're doing this above board. And at the end of the day, like spots like that are asking for like fairly little money. And so it's really easy to be like, we would like to have a good relationship with the Parks Department.
Yeah.
And like maybe over time we could partner with the Parks Department, the state forestry service, the National Park Service. So it's like that's where my head's going. Like it's like this is like, again, this is step one as to like a much larger program that I would love to see happening for people everywhere, not just in Los Angeles. It's like if we could build this here, then we can open source it and lay out the guidebook exactly how people can do this anywhere.
Yeah.
In like both financially and culturally and like ethically sustainable way.
That'd be so sick, dude. Oh my gosh, that is awesome.
It makes me think there's two things I'm going, or a question and a comment. The comment, because in Chicago, I know a band earlier this year had with kind of back in June, they had done a release show in a park and they wrote a full documented list of, okay, we did a DIY show. This is what we did, and left it basically out to the public. I know that's up somewhere on Fax's Twitter account. They left, and it's a really great post because it's very vivid and telling like, yeah, you could just do this in Chicago. And I imagine with so much of these spaces and parks in LA, it's doable if you just keep talking and kind of pestering and then figuring out. But
yeah, and it's even doable if we don't. Like I asked
Yeah.
the people at Bronson, like the parks folks who were there present for the show. I was like, so people ever done this? Because I've never noticed it. And they're like, well, if they do, they don't tell us, and that's fine. And they said
That's
like pretty
sick.
chill about that.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And then also, I think you brought up the decibel limit, but with these acts that you are booking for floating, are there any kind of like hard bar, or is there certain limitations you feel like if this would not fit, we want like this kind of particular sound? I'm not quite sure how I want to ask that, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think as the production role opens up, like I would love to see more people booking and taking on other days of the week. I just want to make sure that we have it like figured out on our end before bringing other people in to something that might not be able to be easily explainable right off the bat.
Yeah.
So like I think I'm really present for deep listening, and I want to nurture environments that don't necessarily feel like a party atmosphere at the moment. Like I'm not trying to like, I mean, I love like middle of the night dance parties. But like,
Yeah.
I think that at the moment with where we're at, I'm much more interested in like booking things that are reverent in like companionship or like complementary relationship with the environment that we're in. So it's like I'm also taking a lot of time to run around figuring out where the stages go in all of these places. And so even the way that Sancha's setting up an Exposition Park Rose Garden, I was there for like an hour and a half last week trying to figure out exactly where to play in light with the sun setting. And like the shows this week, it's all very much like it's not throwing a show in nature. It's how to highlight a relationship between soundscape and landscape and what that means. Especially as for the most part, all of the artists who are performing, if not from LA, have been living in LA for a decent amount of time, and so have their own inspirations and places that they go to find solace or inspiration or listen to like their new masters or something. And so I think there's a lot of like highlighting communal inspiration and like things that we all love that we didn't know that we could share stories of. So it really is like highlighting stories of the land. In addition to the music and the musicianship.
Wow, dude, that is so sick. Like, I don't know. I just love all the stuff you're doing. That's so cool.
I love all the stuff you're doing.
Thank you.
It's fun to nerd out about this, though. I feel like no one ever asks, and so it all just sits.
This is our jam,
dude. It's so fun.
This is it.
Dude,
We're a policy working group for
like seriously, I love like it's like you said, nerding out about this stuff because there's not that many people, I guess, that we can do this to. I don't know,
And this city is so fascinating. I mean, California has a completely different history from the rest of the U.S. And Los Angeles County also has the largest population of indigenous folks living within the county.
Nice.
And so it's like there are a decent amount of Tongva sites that are still here, whether it's Eagle Rock or Tongva Springs. And that was very much disrupted by Spanish colonialism. And LA and California are built in the spirit and the aesthetic of Spanish colonialism, even though obviously American imperialism then overtook that. And so there's so many stories and pieces of history to untangle, and so many stories of communal activism, like I was mentioning before, we got these parks. Like we did a show with SK Kakraban in a spot that was called Marsh Park until recently, and now it's called Lewis McAdams Riverfront Park. And I was like, I wonder who Lewis McAdams was. And then we Googled him, and for like decades he was fighting the city on building more cement for the LA River. And he was out there just like cleaning up and rehabilitating the river constantly. And he started a group called Friends, or co-founded a group called Friends of the LA River, which has now been doing amazing work for a very long time. And he passed, I think it was a couple of years ago. And so they named the park after him. And it's just things like that I feel like are super important to be like, okay, there's like, maybe it feels innocuous when you see it and don't look into the histories of it. But it's like the more that we talk about this, the more that we talk about why there are oil fields in Inglewood right next to a beautiful park that now has a manufactured waterfall and the conflicting relationship of those two. And then we can better understand the history of our city, the history of self-organizing, the history of like what we can do together if we like keep this in our head and in our hearts and use music as like an aesthetic tool to have these conversations. I think that's really exciting.
That's so cool that you like find the importance of just like the indigenous history of like the area too, because I think that's something that's also like really important that I've been really getting into. And like, where I'm from, like Ventura County is all like Chumash land, that's like where all the Chumash are from and stuff. And just like I'm really into like archaeology, like that's like what I'm kind of like going into and stuff. And just like learning about like the Chumash. And what's really sad about like Santa Barbara is like I just like recently picked up a book from a professor at UCSB. They put out this book called like the Prehistory of like Goleta, and it's like really sad too because like all of like the stuff, most of the stuff we know about the Chumash and like Goleta and Santa Barbara is from corporate archaeology. Like how it's like state law to like have like a monitor of like whatever indigenous group is like in that from that area. Be present while they're like excavating, and they'll like find these sites, but like all of the data and stuff that they have is like from corporate stuff, which is like really sad. And it's like, well, you did this excavation, now they're just going to put an airport over it. And it's
that's like why it was funded.
Exactly. And
same here, literally across the street from where I live. Like I live right off the Baiona wetlands. And like in the 80s and 90s, DreamWorks was trying to build their studio there.
Wow.
And as they were excavating, they found a lot of I mean, there was a burial site. There was so much pottery, tools that they were finding, and after like years of community protest, DreamWorks stopped trying to build, but they had already set all the permits and development in motion. So another group came in and built a neighborhood called Playa Vista that didn't exist until about 15, 20 years ago, and then was just built over like several miles of wetlands. Yeah, and I mean, once that was all set, they just completely erased the history of the wetlands of this region that was undeveloped for
thousands of years, and people were like living there for thousands of years, and like you don't think about that. Like there's just families living in Playa Vista, and they have no idea anything
it's
about
like IMAX, YouTube, just like building their bases there.
Exactly. And like especially in like Santa Barbara too, and like Goleta and stuff. What I thought is so sad is like Santa Barbara has had like the biggest population of Chumash people. Like that is like the hub of Chumash people is Santa Barbara and Goleta, and that's like where you had the most populous villages, where they had like thousands of people living in these villages. And there's like this slough in Goleta. I don't know, Maddie, you know the slough, like the big ass thing of water that just runs around. So that was a massive body of water, to the point where like it's documented that like the Spanish would sail their ships through this thing because it was so big.
Wow.
Yeah, it was so big that you could sail your ships in. And like they had like an island in there, and it was a very important island like politically for the Chumash people that live there. And they would have like all these like chiefs that would like gather there and like, you know, discuss like political things among other villages and stuff. And then the military comes in, like, and when they were building like the airport, and they filled the slough, and it's just this tiny little thing of water, dude, and it was this massive body of water that was like political and important and all this stuff, and now it's gone, dude. Like, and people don't know, which is another thing that like I think is so crazy. And like I've been using like, I guess like my personal Instagram as like a platform for this, but like I'll like read things in different books, and like I'll post about it because I'm like, I feel like people should know about this. And it's actually been kind of receptive. Like people will message me and be like, wow, this is cool, I never knew this about like where I live, you know, and stuff like that. And
which is so important.
It's so
like,
important
just to recognize the history of where we are on a daily basis.
It's so important. It's so important.
I don't know if did you ever read Jenny Odell's How to Do Nothing? It came out like maybe 3 years ago at this point.
I don't think I have.
Amazing book, highly recommend. But there's just the section that was reminding me of, where she talks about how she grew up in Northern California, like just above San Jose, and right by this mall called the Crossroads. And her whole life, she just assumed that like, oh yeah, that's what you call a mall. And then as an adult who became like increasingly conscious of Indigenous histories, of something as basic and foundational as watershed, realizing that the mall was actually built over a crossroads of watershed that was then filled in with cement and then called the Crossroads. So it was capitalism becoming a simulation, a symbolic simulation of what was initially there while erasing it.
That's so. What's that book called again? That's interesting. I want to read that.
It's called How to Do Nothing.
Okay, that's cool.
It's kind of just like more so about not how to do nothing, but how to like kind of live a more honest and true life, like aligned with the planet and less with like subservience to capital. That's
sick. Anyways, before we just keep going on like tangents and stuff, I don't know, Maddie, did you want to take the next one?
Oh yeah, well, because our next question we finally get to talk about Never Content. I'm so excited. So Noah, out of your bedroom, which maybe you're in your bedroom or kitchen, I don't know, but you run a quote-unquote arts label known as Never Content, which has been dedicated to documenting the LA local lifers and several of the artists, which include Sonoda, or yourself, or Coyote, or Zachary Paul, who moved to New York, or Patrick Shirashi, but they're TBD favorites, people, many of which we've talked with. And again, I bought a bunch of these tapes directly from you at the mutual benefit gig that we threw at Merton.
And that was so cool. That was the most tapes that anyone's ever bought for me IRL.
That's sick.
I did this with Elliot of Drongo Tapes at the barbershop show.
Another local label,
So I just love to do that, I think.
It's such a beautiful thing. I mean, what a way to also just be remembered from a first interaction. It's like the most supportive person that made something that often feels very invisible, very affirming.
And then for me, it's like, oh, and the pandemic happens, and I always have massive backlogs of tapes. I just kind of I get stuff, and then when it comes to me and when it needs to be taken out, it does. So I listen to a lot of these over. Each of them probably got 2 to 3 listens over the course of 18 months. And even last night, I just revisited the Cuddle formation because I needed to. It was a very, very rough night at closing. So it was good, but again, just wanted to give like a huge thanks to that as much as what was the formal catalyst for starting the label to talk about it. Never Content hasn't had a lot of attention, but it's put out it's got great design, everything. What was the intent?
I mean, I had been wanting to do a cassette label since like probably 2008 when they were like a thing. And like I felt very lucky that when I first started putting out solo music under the name Phillip Seymour Hoffman back then, it was such an open conversation that it was so cool to just immediately be talking to like Mirror Universe tapes, Breakfast of Champs, Impose, like it just Patient Sounds like a couple years later. Like it just felt like there was such a wonderful community of people just being like, oh, whoa, you make music in your bedroom too? Let's trade MP3s. Let's talk about our setups. How do you record? Like, oh, I started a tape label. Is it cool if we put something out? It just like, it felt so organic and friendly and natural. And it still does within circles, but I feel like the indie industrial complex kind of even encroaches on cassette label world, which is so silly.
It's been a little more notable this year.
And it's just like
some of the bigger labels that I do love, and it's not even their fault because like the labels that I'm kind of hinting, I'm talking about Hoffman or Orange Milk. Those guys do not care about.
And they're just so good at what and they've been doing it for so long too. I'm sure it's completely unintentional.
Like they're thrilled. I think that Phillip, like from Pitchfork, just wants to give them like a chalk to be like, yeah, this is what we're doing, but also. I've talked to those guys before, and they're really they just want to go watch fish or just
and I mean, it's always been like that. Like the same week that I put out something with Impose was also the same week that like Talk Normal did, and that blew up. Or like I put out something with Mirror Universe tapes like a month after Troy Moore put out his cassette tape with them, and. And obviously,
it was a Body Angles. I forget what the name of it, but I know someone who has told me for years to spend $90 on it.
I have it. You can come over and listen to it anytime. We played a show in a kitchen in Boston, and it was like his first time playing in Boston. And I was like, "Yo, could I get that tape?" And it was like $5, and now it's just next to my kitchen table.
Wait, who is this? Toro? You said?
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. You played with Toro? That's insane. That's cool.
Yeah, a few times. I think the weirdest one of the weirder ones was I just stayed with Jason, who's the drummer in Cloud Nothings, and also been putting out incredible free jazz music.
Yes,
I've
for
got
real.
The Unifactor tapes. I'm trying to write a thing on that for Tabs Out.
Oh yeah, everything Jason does is beautiful. He's like one of the kindest humans ever. But I was just crashing at his place in June for a night as well. But we played a show at Mercury Lounge together where it was like my completely weird solo music opening up for when Cloud Nothings and Tori Moa were on tour together because they were on Car Park and they did a picture disc together.
Yeah,
which is something that feels like
13.
That must have been 2012-ish.
Oh my god.
Maybe an 11. But yeah, just like these I love these like fun histories.
Dude, that's so sick. What the heck? That's cool.
Yeah, I don't even remember where I was going with that. I got sidetracked by cassette stuff. Oh yeah, okay. So I don't know, touring on this circuit for like 15 years now of just like house shows, galleries, interdependent art spaces. Just like you get to know who the people are who are running the spaces, the people who are doing sound, and I've always felt like I always feel like it's weird to say like audience, but I guess when you're putting out music into the world, there are people who are listening. And I feel like I don't necessarily have the people who are coming to shows that are listening. I have I've built beautiful relationships and community out of the people who are running these spaces or running the soundboard for the night who are listening. And so it feels very funny to be like an organizer's musician to some degree. But and so just after so many years of getting to know all of these people who like are masochistically wanting to make sure that community is being nourished and nurtured where they live and abroad. And recognizing that they also all make gorgeous art that isn't necessarily being as supported with the same reciprocity that they bring to everything. It's just like after so many years of this, and then finally having literally it was the first time I had more than $400 in my bank account. I was like, cool, I'm starting a label. And that was only possible because of a mutual benefit show that we didn't want to play. But it was a private show at a college. We had really weird feels about it, but I was like, I think if we do this, I can release my tape and start a label. And so Jordan was like, well, then let's do it. Like, that's all I need to hear. And I won't mention the band name that we played with, but I feel like it's one of the few times I hate like getting into social or gossipy bullshit, but I feel like it's someone who very much utilized DIY and independent arts movements for their own personal benefit.
Ooh, that's rough.
But yeah, and so then I put out the tape, and that tape funded the next one, and it's just been working on a system of that. So it's like, I mean, it operates at a deficit because it's completely word of mouth. There's no outside support other than what we're doing right now, or I think Maddie is the only person in maybe like two to 3 years who has written about any of the releases, which was the piece on Tabs Out. And other than that, there's like it's just Bandcamp. It's Bandcamp, my newsletter, and word of mouth.
Wow,
that's so cool.
But yeah, so to me, it's just like a way to support the people who really like pour their heart and souls out into their local music communities. And right now, that's dominantly LA, because I realized that it has the most impact to keep it locally, so that I can also immediately support these folks. But like the next album is by a friend in Brooklyn who like painted a mural in the 603 apartment, and so has very much been present with like Silent Barn and so many other arts movements in Brooklyn. And then putting out a tape of like a friend in Montreal who helped run a space called The Plant, and also makes incredible music, and worked with Alexia Avina, who also is from Montreal, and I played with a few times at the Plant. And so there's putting out, and I think it's September next month. I'm going international for the first time, and putting out an album from someone who lives in Italy.
Wow,
and it's in like 3 different languages. And she has an incredible radio show. She supports community wherever she goes. She came out to LA and did a thing on Dub Lab with Chuck, whose music I released, and so that's how I met her, because Chuck introduced us. So yeah, I feel like supporting your local lifers pretty much gets the gist of it.
Yeah, that's amazing. Can we just talk about how sick Chuck is, by the way? Chuck is just the coolest person ever.
Yeah, such a sweetheart.
Yeah, literally so cool.
So I was listening to the interview this morning. I had to do that research over a cup of coffee.
Yeah, both Chuck and Chris, like, what a good combo too.
Dude, they're
Chris,
really good at what they do. Like, they're sick.
Yeah, and Chris just got his like law degree and is working with tenants' rights and organizing.
Yes, yeah, I saw that.
Yeah,
it's so sick.
But also like was up until the pandemic was booking like weird ambient and like experimental shows in the patio of a bookstore in Echo Park. Like,
I didn't know that until Chuck told me, and I was like, wow, I did not know that history of Contact Wave. Like, that's sick. Anyways, Maddie, did you want to talk about something else too?
I keep going a little bit on Never Content because I got a couple of questions, I guess, from some perspectives there. So the tapes themselves, if people don't know, and I'll just put one up on the screen for the live stream, these are really, really effing elegant, lovely, lovely tapes. The consistent, the flower or tree that's always put on there, the little tidbit it comes with that's extra case. How do you kind of envision a release if you know it's going to be a tape, or if it's going to be a zine or a CD even?
I got my Valerian root tea.
I am not big on branding. Yeah, you got your Rooibos tea. I'm not big on branding. Oh wait, no, that wasn't Rooibos. I'm trying to. It's just the Z.
The Valerian root.
Yeah. That's the one. Oh, yeah, Valerian root.
Yeah.
Yeah, with Zachary's. Yeah, I'm not big on branding, and so I didn't want to put like the same logo on the end of everything. And I was just like, oh, like I love plants. Like, how about for every single release, I have a side conversation with the person whose music this is, and talk about a plant that's meaningful in their life for whatever reason. And so that's always like its own conversation, which is wonderful. And I feel like I should probably be cataloging these so that folks know what plant is on the side of their of their music. But yeah, so then I find a line drawing on the internet that is not theft, or have one drawn, and then kind of just like subtly put that in at the base so that when all of the tapes are next to each other, it looks like a shelf garden. And to me, that's also
so
just
sick.
an easy identifiable way of like for the same purpose of like why someone would put a brand there. Um, and then yeah, the design is so different each time. I have no design or visual sensibility. So most artists either do it themselves or they have a friend do it, or we connect the dots and talk about a mutual friend who could do it. Like, so for Zachary Paul's tape that you just held up, like not many people know that like Dustin Wong went to it's Micah is the one in Baltimore, and like studied sculpture and art.
Oh wow.
And so I know that Dustin's been drawing for a long time, and the tape that you just held up, Seasons, he drew that cover as well. He did the original cover, and I was just like, hey Dustin, like you and Zachary are buds, like would you mind like just drawing this cover that Zachary would like? Zachary had sent me a very digital album cover, and I said I really love the concept and the idea of the Tree of Life, but I would like it to just feel more organic and less digitally rendered.
Yeah.
And so Dustin did that in like a day, and I thought it was awesome. So that was two layers. Like one was the Tree of Life, and the other one I was just like, will you just scribble with your pencil on some paper and then just like overlay it? So that was that. And so it's all just like super super organic, super friendly, just like rooted in like conversation with one another.
That's awesome.
I love so many labels that do make everything uniform, but I personally kind of feel like the music is never uniform. It's imbued with so much individual and unique characteristic. I don't want anything to ever look or feel like the other thing. So it's always funny to me too when someone sends me like their album and the cover art that they were thinking. They're like, I know this doesn't necessarily look like the aesthetic, and I'm just like, I don't even know what the aesthetic is.
That's awesome.
That's still what I have liked about it, is because if you do put them all, on the same shelf, I have a couple of photos of them all together, and it makes sense. It's a really colorful, varied output, and then just knowing some of the pieces of context from our own, it's like, well, I've seen Sonoda, and I know like what Lisa's sound is, or hearing the Patrick Shirishi from last year and how big of an effect that's had on his work this year. Really sonically. And so it becomes, or even like I'm really shocked more people don't know about this Zachary Paul. This one, like the journey, the stuff there, or even the Dustin Wong. I'm probably gonna just go crazy about the.
I don't know how people find out about music anymore, and I don't like want to think about it too hard. So I think about it more in terms of an archive, which does make me feel bad because I want the most amount of people to be able to appreciate this art that is canonical and like changes my life with every single release, because it's such deep conversation and work that goes into making each one happen. But like music journalism seems like largely broken. There's like several great people doing great things such as yourself. But I don't know how word spreads. And so I really just think of it as like, cool, I'm going to try and bring these people together and show their art in a relationship to one another. And I believe that this archive speaks for itself. The work speaks for itself. And it would be beautiful if like, I don't know, every time something new comes out, it's really wonderful because I can see how someone coming to listen to the thing that's on pre-order or that was just released trickles down through the rest of the archive. And someone who came for one thing might buy 3 or 4 things. And I think that that's a really, really cool thing to just be able to witness on the back end. Also, like the majority of the artists whose work I've helped to bring into the world don't use social media, don't have social media. Maybe it's like their first solo album, but they've been making music in partnership with other people for a decade plus. And so I think there's just a really cool thing to be said for like, I don't know, just like doing things outside of like constant surveillance, like constant social media validation. It's just like this music is beautiful and needs to be heard, and I will like do as much as I can to like help bring it into the world and try and provide a platform or a forum where I think that whether it's now or in 5 years, people will be able to access this.
I love that, dude. That's kind of like kind of how, excuse me, sorry about that. Kind of how I guess like me and Maddie sort of thought is like of like the TBD tapes thing that like we kind of did, where it's like we're just gonna take these live performances and put them on tape because we feel like this should be like archived more, or at least that's kind of how I feel. I feel like it should be archived more so than just like online or something. Like, here's a physical thing that you can hold of like this performance, you know? Like,
yeah, and even these conversations too. I mean, like what you're doing in real time is outstanding because no one else is really providing a platform for any of these contemporary artists to really like have these deep and fruitful conversations. But also, it's like everyone that I know that you're speaking to, like we're all going to be doing this for the rest of our lives,
Yeah.
and whether it's the same 5 to 50 people that pay attention for the rest of our lives, or folks like Patrick, whose work like I 100% believe is going to have an impact on the world like throughout his lifetime.
Dude, seriously.
Like to be able to have these conversations and to be able to have them archived when no one else is taking the time or the chance to do that is really important.
Dude.
Yeah, there's so many things that we have an obscene amount of data or like content of, and it's like funny that a lot of times the things that feel the most meaningful is what we have the least record of.
Yeah. Anyways, I think that's bringing us close to the end here. We don't have any listener questions, but I do have one that I kind of just want to ask you. Just a fun question. Can you like shout out some like musicians and artists, I guess, that you're spinning right now and just like love and appreciate?
Yeah, I mean, I obsessively listen to like Sarah Louise's music, and so it was really cool to have her. A couple weeks ago, I'm like completely losing track of time. A couple weeks ago, for one of the floating events, I've been loving like Rachika's music. That recently was on Revenge.
Yes, so good.
Yeah, I mean, there's just been beautiful music abound. I've been thinking about Telepathic Children from the Bay because I was thinking about the off-grid show that we did at the southern entrance of Joshua Tree with the generator and my friend's PA. And,
that's sick.
And I was thinking about that this week and was just like, oh, I wonder what Telepathic Children are up to. I'm always obsessed with everything that my friend Peter Vincent Hernandez does, who plays as Julius Smack, but is most likely going to be playing under his own name moving forward, and his absolutely phenomenal tape label Practical Records.
Amazing.
I'm always deeply, deeply appreciative for my buddy Matthew Sage, and this morning was listening to
dude Matt shouted you out recently to us.
Yeah, shout out to M Sage.
He shouted you out recently. I messaged him because he like posted some videos of him skating, and like I responded and I was like, hell yeah, Matt, that's sick, dude. And he posted one of Venice, and I was like, that's so cool, you're skating Venice. And he was like, dude, Noah Klein took that video. And I was like, oh dude, that's crazy.
yeah, when he comes out here, when Tiffany was coming out for NAMM, we would always have a skate day.
That's so cool. Anyways, what continue with what you were saying?
Oh yeah, no, I've been listening to the Setsubun series as along with probably most other people who have their head in that cloud, and was just like loving blasting it. The latest one. So good. Yeah, I mean, I could really go all day. My head has been so intertwined, especially with the floating shows and listening to everyone and being like, where is this going to be? So it's like right now, like I'm just like, I mean, I love Sancha. When I came back to LA and found out about Sancha, I was just like, this to me feels like one of the most important like bands in Los Angeles that I hope everyone learns about. And I'm just so excited to be able to have them in the Rose Garden today, which is just going to be filled with families enjoying their weekend.
Yeah,
that's going to be amazing. This, like, beautiful queer ranchera music.
Yeah.
And like that to me like excites me like nothing else. Yeah, I don't know. I'm hyped on everything that feels like it's being done like with soul and true intention. I just want to support and encourage. And
that's amazing, Noah. Wow, love that. So I guess one last thing too before we hop into our final question, but how can people keep up with all things like that you do? I don't know, like you do so much stuff.
Also, you do have a new track coming out.
Oh yeah, on Moonglyph. Yeah.
I got asked to contribute a track to the compilation, which was really special and meaningful because I love that label so much. And I've been working with them on two things. Like one of them is like is just a long piece of music with Zachary Paul and Lisa and Adrian of Sonoda.
Oh, sick.
And I haven't told Matthew, but I'm gonna email it to him and see if he wants anything to do with it.
Dude, that'd be amazing.
and then the other one is just two long form tracks that I've been slowly working on with the idea of it being a Moonglyph. release, but it's been doing so many other things that it's hard to sit down and be like, oh, I guess I should record my own music too. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of the internet. I try to post things on Instagram, like in the stories that I think people will find useful or helpful. So I feel like that's a good place. I don't use Twitter too much. People can always just email me. I feel like my inbox for the last like 12 years has been a lot of question asking and people asking me like, hey, like I see you've been doing this thing. How do you tour? Stuff like that. And I'm always happy to give people advice and feedback and tell stories. So I don't know, however people want to find their way, I'm all good with.
Noah, dude, you're just a resource. I love that. That's amazing. Like you're just putting all of your knowledge out for like anybody to, have as well.
Probably start writing zines again.
Honestly, like write a zine. Like I really would be looking forward to like seeing that zine or something that you would put out like on how to do like floating and stuff and like how to work with cities and just do that. That would be really cool. Anyways, so Maddie, do you want to hit Noah with the last question?
Oh man,
this is a rough one. This is a rough one.
It's a soft one though. We're gonna make it soft.
We gotta preface it because lately we haven't been getting good feedback from it, but we're gonna ask you anyway. So.
Oh no.
So Noah, you're just having a fantastic day, good time out in LA, and unfortunately, just a really nice, lovely little white rat is just running up your way and is going to jump in your mouth. And it's your call here, head or butt, and why?
Yeah.
Like of the side of the rat that should go into my mouth?
Yeah.
That is correct.
I feel like head, like it's just going into my mouth. It's not going into my body.
No.
Not in your body, just the mouth.
Yeah.
I think mouth is all good.
Yeah.
It's like just like getting to know this nice little creature that we share space with.
Yeah. That's a great answer.
And we'll also specify it's a white lab rat, so it's really
it's
just
clean. It's not a New York rat. I don't know if you had experience with those guys. I don't know.
Yeah, plenty.
Or a Chicago rat.
I know. I think that's why like it doesn't like concern me that much.
Yeah. Anyways, that was a great answer. We've never gotten that one that's so soft and just so nice. Anyways, Noah, I think that's about all we have for today's show. Thanks for tuning into TBD on KCSB FM 91.9 now every Tuesday 8 to 10 p.m. and NetNet Radio every Saturday 8 p.m. Be sure to tune in next week. We have an interview with ambient musician Marsha Fisher out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. This is Noah Klein out of Los Angeles. Thanks, Noah.
Thank you.